Peace in YouTube. What's up, everybody? What's up? So I'm going to continue on with part 2 of this main idea series that I'm doing. Hello there, I'm Greg from GregsTutoringNYC at gmail.com. I do a lot of tutoring for standardized testing and homework help, especially in the New York City area, especially for tests like the SHSAT and the college high school test. And I find that there's a consistent situation that kind of keeps popping up, which is that many of the reading comprehension and even the grammar part of some of these tests, the literature, the writing section, so to speak, depends on certain things happening. And a focus of a lot of it is about the main idea. Even when you're writing for yourself, you have to come up with your own thesis statement, your own main idea of which to write from. But I want to focus on the reading part of it, but you have to have all your multiple hats on to get some of these right. So the last time I covered a bunch of positional and contextual places that you can find the main idea. I want to strongly suggest again that those are just ideas that you need to work with. Even though I gave about half a dozen of them, you're not following a rule book. You're reading the passage to understand it. And by the way, you happen to be doing the 6 things or whatever I showed you about. Some is finding the title. Some is looking at the first sentence, the first paragraph, the first 2 paragraphs, the last sentence, the last paragraph, the last 2 paragraphs. Look at any sidebars that are in the article. Look at the abstract. There's normally an italicized thing at the top. Look at that. Look at other parts, including reading the full passage. Look at any illustrations that give you photos, charts, pictures, illustrations. Anything they give you is part of the passage, even though it may not literally be text. But often, you're not supposed to just literally look at a picture and go, oh yeah, main idea. You're reading the passage, and you're going to use these other things to help you identify what the main idea is, okay? And in some cases, talking about text, there might be a caption underneath the illustration. That's what you need to read. A lot of kids don't read that. They don't read the abstract on the top. So what I'm going to do is really quickly mention another 1 or 2 places, because some passages are not fiction, nonfiction. They might be instructional, or they might be chronological. So sometimes that can help you find the main idea. Sometimes there's formatting involved. I told you the abstract at the top is normally in italics, but some passages, and it doesn't come up an awful lot, which is why I didn't spend a lot of time at it on the other live stream. Sometimes if there's a bunch of bold facing, or something's in the shape of a table or something, and it could be text sometimes. It doesn't have to be a data chart. It could be something else that's broken down in certain ways. It could be like the height of a kid as showing a butterfly going from a cocoon into something. That's telling you something. So you want to look at formatting, not just text, but how things are laid out. There's also things like headings. So if we come back to a passage like this one here, this right here, this unlikely in the extreme, that's bold-faced, number 1, right? So they're using formatting there. And number 2, it's a section header. So the author tells us something, there's a section. There's another section about something else. So the author has organized their passage in a certain way. That's a clue to you, also to the main idea and other things. It's a clue to you about the theme. It's a clue to you about the plot. It's a clue to you about the summary. It's a clue to even sometimes the moral of the story. Sometimes that's part of what's up there. Now, often the headings are a little cryptic and they don't really reflect things. And this is also true of the title of the whole passage. But you have to connect the dots. That's what a lot of this is about connecting the dots. Looking for proof. So if you see this is laced through this whole passage, that kind of a thing, all right? Whereas the passage we went through the other day had nothing. It just had that. By the way, you'll see some passages without even a title, all right? So there's that. Sometimes there'll be a question from the author. That's one of the reasons I didn't cover this the last time, that made this passage we covered the last time so good. The author laid out a title, Finding Sacagawea, and it immediately shot at you. Were we related? Well, I hope if this passage is written properly, the author should answer that. And that seems to be already what the main idea is. Not only does the title almost give us it, but the first sentence, were we related? That's not even really truly a meaty paragraph. It just says, were we related? I had to find out. So I hope for the rest of the passage she finds out, and the answer is either yes or no. And that's what the title says. It's about doing that. So that's pretty much almost the main idea. So you have to read the passage and verify that it actually is or not. Okay? Also, what happens in a lot of passages is there's also lots of repetition. So I want to focus kind of on that today, in addition to going through some of the other stuff. So let me just check 1 second that the stream is still live. Yes, it seems to be. So I came up with some hypothetical prose, and we'll just look at it. Before we look at it, be clear that main idea is all over the place. It can be in just a sentence. What's the main idea of just a sentence? What's the main idea of a sidebar? What's the main idea of an illustration? What's the main idea of a whole section? What's the main idea of a paragraph? What's the main idea of a whole chapter of a book? In our case, we're focusing on standardized testing often. So we're looking at what's the main idea of the whole passage, has a whole entity by itself, right? And that doesn't mean there's not sub-main ideas within it. We talked about that. We went through the last time when we got the main idea of every single paragraph. I don't know, there might have been 25 paragraphs. Each main idea is not the same. So what you have to do is take in all the main ideas as a unit, and from that, grok out of it what's happening. Now, some paragraphs don't deal with the main idea. You could ask, well, what are they there for? Because they may be talking about some sidebar issue, or maybe the passage is even poorly written, right? There's so many different choices here to go by and with. So be careful when you're looking at some of this, and it can kind of give you a mishmash, because it looks like the passage might be wandering back and forth. But what you're trying to look for is the consistency across all of them, and then get rid of the noise. All right. So I came up with a hypothetical example here that we're just going to analyze. So here's my passage. My passage in this case just be one paragraph. The SHSAT is a hard exam. The SHSAT has 14 questions and takes 3 hours. 10 questions on the SHSAT are failed questions. The SHSAT is administered on a Saturday. The SHSAT has a math section. The SHSAT expects 8th graders to know some 10th grade math. And while preparing for the SHSAT, I studied 20 hours just on exponents, right? I had to keep practicing the volume of a sphere until I got it right, because I kept getting it wrong. I studied long hours. Now, one of the issues, in addition to everything we talked about the last time, and everything you know, is normally the main idea is to find us what the passage is about. So if we would ask, what's the main idea of my passage? If it's just what it's about, the answer has to be the SHSAT, because this is clearly about the SHSAT. And yet that's not the main idea of this passage. And I think this is one of the kind of misconceptions a lot of kids have, and including a stopgap. I think enough kids can see, oh, this is talking a lot about the SHSAT. But that in and of itself is not the main idea. It's related to the main idea. So there's a whole bunch of topics, subjects I mentioned before, like theme, moral, summary, plot, setting, main idea, summary. They're all tied in. They're all. If you would do circles, they would end up being like a Venn diagram, or like the Olympic, the 3 circles with the 2 underneath it. They're all interconnected. They don't necessarily stand separately. But that doesn't mean a summary of the passage is the same as the main idea of the passage, and it doesn't mean the main idea of the passage is the theme of the passage. Now, sometimes they're super duper close, and sometimes they're not. And sometimes there'll be a statement in the passage that literally tells you what the main idea is. And sometimes the author never makes an explicit statement to the fact of what the main idea is, and you have to piece it together. So in most cases, we're going to be piecing it together. If the author gave it to us, then a lot of this wouldn't be happening. We're trying to read a passage. This is called reading comprehension. We're trying to figure out what's being said. So clearly this passage is, quote, about the SHSAT. But it turns out that the SHSAT is the topic. A topic is a person, place, or thing relating to a noun. It could also be a time frame and perhaps some other things. So the topic of this passage is the SHSAT. Is that the main idea? Well, I think if we left out the SHSAT and defining what the main idea is, that we would be making a mistake, right? So we have to include in the main idea the topic. So this is one of the problems in a lot of you guys from 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. Your teacher gets up and says the main idea is what the passage is about. And you can clearly say, well, it's about the SHSAT. And you don't win the prize because that's not the main idea. That's the topic. So what we're trying to look for is a topic sentence. So sometimes a passage will give you the topic sentence. In this case, it's sentence number 1. It's not just about the SHSAT. It's about the SHSAT being hard. Okay? So in this case, I gave it to you. Almost like the Finding Sacagawea passage. The author never said that thing, but by virtue of using the title with the question, it's pretty much a given that that's what's going to happen. All right? So you're looking for a topical sentence. If you can't find one, you have to synthesize one. You have to piece together the other parts of what you're told. And whether you find a topic sentence or you synthesize it, you have to verify that it really is the main idea. And the way to verify it's the main idea is looking for supporting details. Okay? So let's just shoot down a few misconceptions before we get a little deeper. The first is the passage is what it's about, is the main idea. Even though that's true, it's too vague to be helpful. So the main idea is not the topic. The main idea is not the summary. The main idea is not the plot. So then we kind of bump up the definition. It's what it's mostly about. Well, the problem with saying it's mostly about it, it's the passage is still mostly about the SHSAT. And that's still not the main idea. Okay? So what we want to do is tie some of this together. So it's about the most important point that the author's trying to make with the topic itself. So it's not just the SHSAT. What about the SHSAT is the author trying to write here? The author's not telling us the SHSAT takes place on a Saturday, even though that's line number 4. And the author's not trying to just tell us there's a test here. Okay, the author's trying to say something specific about the SHSAT. What is the important point or the important thought here? Okay, and again, as we set up here, either the author's going to give you a straight out topical sentence like I did in one above, or you have to piece it together. So that's what I'm talking about, synthesizing or creating a conceptual composite. A composite is bringing in pieces from different pieces and creating an entity that didn't literally exist. So instead of the author explicitly stating like sentence number 1, you have to implicitly piece it together. Okay? So we want to ask a whole bunch of questions, and this gets super tough on hard passages. Finding Sacagawea is easy. There's super hard passages where this gets to be a mismatch, which is why I'm trying to show that paragraph number 1, because we're going to talk about it further. So what does the author want you to walk away with? Just the SHSAT? No, something further. Okay, so what is the author trying to answer, explain, or describe? This is more the definition of what the main idea is, not just what the passage is about or what it's mostly about. It's tied into that important point. What exactly is the running situation running through the passage consistently about what is being described, and why do you think the author wrote the passage in the first place? And if there was one thing that kind of bubbles out, transpires everything, overall, what would it be? So if you were to write what the author's writing about, what do you think the focus would be? Because that you could say that's the main idea as well, all right? Let me just make sure this is coming on you guys' screen. Yes, it seems to be. Okay, so do other sentences provide examples of the main idea? because we're talking about the main idea needing to be supported by that. So what we're going to look for is facts and supporting information that backs up whatever the statement is. So there's going to be some sort of statement. It could be the topic sentence, or it could be something you synthesize. You want to find stuff that supports that overall, right? Because we talked about there can be a main idea of a paragraph. You can find the main idea of a paragraph, but that is not always the same as the main idea of the whole passage. So we're trying to look for these entities called supporting details, right? So supporting detail is additional information that does this explanation or definition or proving the main idea. And supporting details deal with why the main idea is so. It gives reasons. So for instance, the SHSAT has 114 questions and takes 3 hours. Okay, the SHSAT expects 8th graders to know 10th grade material. I studied for a long time. While preparing for the SHSAT, I studied 20 hours just on exponents. The test was so hard I had to keep practicing the volume until I got it right. So what keeps running, and what are these supporting? They're all supporting not the SHSAT, but the SHSAT is a hard test. Okay? So the main idea for my passage was the SHSAT is a hard exam. All right? And I think we need to go back and go back. So if we look at each one of these examples one at a time, if we said because the SHSAT has 114 questions in 8 hours, then it's a hard exam. Because the SHSAT expects 8th graders to do 10th grade math, it's a hard exam. Because I studied 20 hours for exponents, the SHSAT is a hard exam. Or not that smart, at least, maybe. But we have a running theme going here in this case. And often you only need 2 or 3 really supporting details. But there's 5 here. All right? So there's enough examples here to re-emphasize the fact that the original statement here, and again, this is my lead-in topical sentence, which is often how it's done, but sometimes it's not. So if I deleted sentence number 1, I should still come to the same conclusion. And I could change sentence number 1 to this. There's this test called the SHSAT, and then keep 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 exactly as they are. And I should come up with the same answer. I should be able to synthesize from 2 to 9 that, hey, there's this thing called the SHSAT, and hey, the SHSAT's hard. And be able to synthesize sentence number 1 on my own. Again, a conceptual composite. And the fact that 1 is there, now that 1 is there, I need to go and prove it. But even if you synthesize it, you still need to now go and prove it. You're going to come up with a thought about what the main idea is. Now find things that prove it using this kind of technique I'm showing here, where you're going to use this because stuff, right? Because I studied all night, the SHSAT is hard, that kind of a thing. So if we kind of back off for a second and try to create like an algorithm or a mathematical explanation of what the main idea is, it's the topic, right? Plus the composite of all the supporting details. So it turns out some details in the passage are not supporting details. They're just miscellaneous details. So we want to take the topic plus the other stuff. So if you tie back into this over here, where it talks about the additional information, it's not all the additional information, it's the ones that do the explanation, the defining, and the proof. And if we go back to this definition of main idea, I don't know where this one here, this is what we're talking about. It's the topic plus the important points all tied together in a nice bow. So the hard part is tying the supporting details together in a nice bow. Okay, again, mostly the passage is not going to give us sentence number 1. So the main idea is about categorizing, organizing, and filtering out. You have to do the filtering out on these passages. And in your own reading. Okay, you're going to end up getting a job or trying to follow instructions or whatever. You have to separate the wheat from the shaft, so to speak. You have to find what's really important here. What must I do? And what's sundry and extra miscellaneous information that may or may not matter. Or it may matter, but it might be like just an add-on addition or something. All right? So there's things like that. And you want to ask yourself the who, what, where, when, why, because that's the purpose of what's going on here. Okay? So what you're trying to do when you get to the main idea is you want to whittle things down to be clear and concise. You don't want to get your main idea to be a paragraph. You only want your main idea at most to be a sentence, and not a 10-line sentence. At most, just a sentence across the page, and even sometimes just a phrase. A phrase can sometimes capture it enough for the purpose of a standardized test. Now, a lot of what I'm talking about is for the purpose of standardized tests. There are other uses in your classroom where a main idea gets discussed and beat up. And remember, too, that in your classroom, when you look at a piece of literature, it might be a passage, you talk about it and discuss it. It's open to interpretation. On a standardized test, unless it's the short answer question or the long answer question where you're being asked to write something about something, then that sometimes is open for interpretation, what your thoughts are. But if it's the multiple choice part, it's almost never about interpretation. It's about finding the main idea and looking at it. And remember, as we talked about the last time, if you have a passage with 6 to 12 questions, so let's say 10 questions, there's almost always a straight up main idea question. There's almost always a straight up indirect main idea question, which is really the same as the straight up one. And then there could be 2, 3, 4, even sometimes 5 questions that depend on you knowing the main idea. And then there might be 2 other questions that depend on you knowing the main idea of a paragraph, which may not be the same. So the main idea is laced through this. It's a fundamental cornerstone of all this kind of stuff. So it's so important to get it and understand it. All right? Let me just make sure we're live. Yes, we seem to be. Okay, so what you want to do is whittle this thing down to be as simple as possible, but no simpler. If it's too simple, it says my passage is about SHSAT. If it's too complicated, it says it's about SHSAT being hard and me studying and there's so many questions and yada and yada and yada. So you don't want this to be a tome, and you don't want it to be comma, 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 okay? You want to make it clear and concise. You don't want to make it too short that you leave something out. You don't want to make it too long that it becomes tedious and starts talking about supporting detail, per se. Okay? And it doesn't mean an overview of a supporting detail can't be included as a keyword or a key phrase in your main idea. It can be, right? And often that's exactly the right thing to do, all right? So that's what we're going to whittle down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move away from my example, and we're going to do another example, and then come back to it. What we're going to do is go back to the normal passage, a poem that you know about. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty back together again. So we're kind of in a void here. What's missing? There's kind of 2 things missing. The first thing that's missing is the title. So all passages don't need a title. The other thing that's missing is we don't know who or what Humpty is. So a lot of you know who Humpty Dumpty is because you've probably heard this poem before as a nursery rhyme, right? But we're not supposed to be using outside external knowledge. And that's the danger that a lot of kids have also when they're reading a passage. You're mainly only supposed to be using what the author is providing to you. Now, I keep giving examples as a running theme when I do a lot of these live streams. Like, if it talked about George Washington, it's kind of a given that an American kid in grade 7, let's say, is supposed to know that George Washington was at least the president, no less the first president. All right? So there is common things. Or if it said there was a dog barking, yeah, you're supposed to know that what a dog is. If it told you like a bison was barking, a lot of you may not know what a bison is. So that's getting more esoteric. Now, some of it could be regional, like New York State used to have beavers. It doesn't anymore. But California may not have beavers. So California may not know what beaver is, and a New Yorker might. So, but everybody knows what a dog and a cat is, and a goldfish and stuff like that. So that common knowledge, if you will, can sometimes be brought into some of these passages. So what you need to do is, if you find a passage where something is obviously missing like this, you need to go find where it is, okay? You need to go find it, because it's there. If it's something that common, it should be there. For instance, in this case, it's not there. So what we want to have done was look for it, and a lot of kids skip the top, which is the abstract again. So normally there's the directions, and then your passage. Part of the passage has the abstract. I showed you guys that the last time with one of the examples. This thing right here. You have to read that. So perhaps in the Humpty Dumpty poem, for somebody who doesn't know who Humpty Dumpty is and is not seeing a picture of Humpty Dumpty and so on, you need to go look for it. So perhaps there's an abstract before it saying that Humpty Dumpty is a personified egg and giving more stuff about him. Or depending on how you look at it, he's an eggified person. And whatever, the nursery rhyme guy. And since this is a poem, it may turn out that Humpty Dumpty is not actually related to anything at all. And if you look at the history of Humpty Dumpty, there's kind of a couple of perspectives. One is it kind of comes from Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland thing. It means you have to have read that. So that's really pushing it. You shouldn't be required to have read that to know and be able to interpret this passage. There's also a figurative interpretation of this, that this is actually a cannon, I think, in England, that was in a fortress that fell down or something, and I guess broke up. All right, so we would hope that was there, because that's both of those great leaps. If you never read Alice in Wonderland, or you didn't know about that, and some of this is probably even lost to history. Probably nobody even knows exactly why. So you need to find out the reasons. And I use a purposely esoteric example to say, go look for it. Go look for it. It's not going to grok either the canon thing or the Alice in Wonderland. It's not going to implore you to do that. Okay? Rarely in a poorly written passage it might, but almost never is that going to really happen in a real life standard test. It's probably not going to happen on the SHSAT, although the SHSAT is requiring you to be a little more deeper knowledge in literature and so on than the standard student, and almost never on, say, the New York State test and so on. So what you want is that abstract. Once you see the abstracts and it gives you some definitions, it's going to be more than I just put here, okay? Then you can go to the passage and try to figure it out. So, so we're trying to figure out the main idea of the poem, right? So we know there's a bunch of supporting details. Humpty Dumpty fell, and he fell badly. Humpty Dumpty, a repair attempt was made. We know that was made in the last sentence here. And furthermore, the repair attempt failed. So, so earlier I discussed filtering things out. Is it important that Humpty Dumpty was on a wall? Is that just extraneous extra information that doesn't matter? Now we can start getting kind of deepish into interpretations. We know Humpty fell bad. Okay, first of all, we know he fell bad because he tells us he didn't just fall; he had a great fall. So either he somehow, even if he just tripped, whatever happened, he tripped badly. But he could have. Did he fall super high? Was it just the way he fell and cracked? We don't know. Whatever happened, the guy broke into smithereens. And he broke into so much smithereens that he was unable to put it back together again. I mean, imagine an egg and just drop it. It's going to be splattered all over the place. Not just the inside, but the shell too. Or imagine dropping a glass. There's going to be glass all over the place. Little shards and little pieces. And imagine trying to be tasked with the job of putting that together again. So it's impossible. This could also be figurative. Maybe the passage is even about somebody, some politician in literature or something, Jew, where things got so bad. We're in political times right now that maybe we can't go backwards in trying to do this. Maybe this is that figurative, okay? But the main idea here is that something happened. Humpty, whatever Humpty represents, fell badly. I got so screwed up that whatever the problem was with Humpty can never be put back together again. Okay? And we can prove it with the becauses. Because, right? Because Humpty sat on a wall and fell, he fell badly and couldn't be mended together. Because all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put back together, he fell badly and couldn't be mended. So is it the topic, Humpty? There's another topic, which is him falling, and there's another kind of topic, which is him being repaired. And when we piece those together, that's our main idea. We got Humpty Dumpty fell badly and couldn't be mended. So this is just another way to try to piece this together. But the important part of this wasn't so much about interpreting what the poem meant, which was that you gotta find, if there seems to be a missing piece, where that missing piece is. And remember, it could be in the title, it could be in the abstract, it could be in the sidebar, it could be in something else that's described along with the passage, like a caption underneath an illustration of Humpty Dumpty. It could have said something about who he was, right? Or what the egg was. So we want to delve into those things. And just like the fact that he sat on a wall, and we can argue this one, whether it's important or not. What was more important was that he fell badly, but we're kind of verifying it. It's almost that he fell off a wall is almost a supporting detail of a supporting detail, right? If it was that he was laying on the ground and he fell badly, we'd be like, say what, right? So the fact that he was on a wall kind of supports the fact that he fell badly, which in the fact that he fell badly is a supporting detail, all right? So what you want to do is remove out stuff and screen stuff so that you're removing the unimportant stuff. So for instance, if we go back to my passage, if my passage was about the SHSAT being hard, okay, then does the line talking about that it was missed on a Saturday, does that support a backup that the SHSAT is hard? Now you could say it was so hard that had to be given on a weekend. That's, first of all, pushing it. Second of all, I never state that in my passage. Okay, and third of all, it's getting to be super interpretive. Normally, you shouldn't need to get to be that interpretive, especially on a passage like this. I'm not saying there's never a passage where you need to go that full mile, but there's enough cases where you don't, and it's almost always you don't. Normally, what you're looking for is there, right? So the fact that the SHSAT was missed on a Saturday is unimportant. So if we go back to that passage, it means out of 9 lines that we don't care about line number 4. Maybe this passage is poorly written. Or maybe the author thought for some reason, oh, that's cool to throw in. But really, we could get rid of line number 4 and still have the same strength in our narrative that the main idea is about the SHSAT being hard. Okay, so we can remove that. Okay, the next line is a little more slippery. Okay, so is line number 5 important? Because it says the SHSAT has a math section. So is that in and of itself saying that the SHSAT is hard? Now, if you think math is hard, you might connect it and say, oh, therefore the SHSAT's hard. But what if you're a genius in math? Do you then think the SHSAT's hard? So line number 5, in and of itself, could also be removed. But the problem with removing 5 is this number 6. And 6 says the SHSAT expects 8th graders to know some 10th grade math. Now that, because it expects 8th graders to know more advanced math or more accelerated math or math in later years, however you want to say this, that also is supporting the fact that the SHSAT is hard. So 5 is almost the lead into 6. So even with 6, I can still remove 5. So 5 actually supports the fact that the SHSAT is hard because of 6. So 5 and 6 go together. But you could argue 5 is still filler because we could still get rid of it. So 5 doesn't directly support that the SHSAT is hard. It indirectly does it with and unison with 6. All right? So you need to go through some of these decisions. And by the way, as you get used to analyzing this, these are snap decisions. You can't spend 20 minutes thinking about whether sentence number 5 really belongs there or not. You have to practice enough, go through 20 passages with a focus of only main idea in mind. Forget about any other question. Only main idea of the passage and only main idea of subjects. And as you whittle it down, just look at the questions that say, what is the central idea of this passage? And answer only those. Read the passage, only answer those. Go to the ones that say, in paragraph 5, the main idea of paragraph 5 is, answer those ones. So you're getting the main idea for only the paragraph. There's also questions that say, like, how does paragraph 5 support the main idea of the whole passage? So those are different main idea questions. There's other ones that are more cryptic. But even if you get answered just those 3 styles, you're going to get used to what am I supposed to be looking for here. All right? And then you're focusing on that so that as you read a passage, you're getting used to grokking all that kind of detail about it. Okay? Go back to where we were. So this is just saying what I said. So if you will, something like 4 and 5 are distractor kind of questions, distractor statements. They're distractors. They're not super important. You need to weigh this as you're looking at the passage. Okay? You need to figure out what's important and what's not important. What's going to distract you? And sometimes they're going to do that. The author, even if there's a topic sentence or not, they're going to start going with stuff when you're starting to formulate what the main idea is, and then they throw something else in the middle of it. It could be extra sentences, it could be extra paragraphs, and then they return back to the main idea. It's almost like, here's the main discussion, we're going to take a sidebar, and then we come back to what it is. You have to note the turns in the passage as the turning points. The passage may go this way and it turns there, then it talks about something and it returns, or it might even go 2 levels away. It talks about X, it goes to Y, it goes to Z, then it goes back to Y, and then it goes back to X. You have to be able to follow the organization of what the author's doing. And again, these are passages that they're picking to make sure that you're following along on that perspective. So what we're going to do is kind of whittle our thing. We went from it's what the passage is about to what the passage is mostly about. And then we talked about the conceptual composite, and it was about the important points along with the topic. So if we kind of work on this as a mathematical formula, again, it's the topic plus all the common supporting detail stuff, minus the misinformation, minus the things that are unimportant. So we're whittling this down, all right? All right? And what you want to get at here is when you're reading the passage, you want to ask yourself, who cares? Not who cares in the sense like why are they making me do this, or this is so stupid and useless. And those might be valid perspectives. So I don't mean it flippantly that way. I mean like what is the point of the passage? Who cares what the point of the passage is? Find out what it is. That's what I'm talking about here. So that's what you're trying to get. What is the conceptual composite of everything happening here? And to synthesize that. And even sometimes when the author looks like what happens to be is a topic sentence, the topic sentence might be incomplete. The author may start the passage by making what looks like a topic sentence, even the first sentence of the whole passage. And it looks like, oh cool, this is a slam dunk. And as the passage goes on, the author kind of adds stuff to that. Okay? So that may turn out that the passage ends up that the SHSAT is hard in math. Because if you look at what I wrote about, I talked about the area of a circle or something, and exponents or whatever. So I talked about stuff like that. Okay, so it could be that this is about the math section only of the SHSAT being hard. And I said before where it said the SHSAT has a math section, that's unimportant. Maybe that turns out that it really is important. So as we bounce around all the different paragraphs of a passage, we need to keep analyzing and going back and forth. So again, this ties into the misconceptions. You need to keep with the flow and the organization and what the author's throwing at you. Okay? So let's just kind of run through a summary of some of this. So the misconception is the main idea is a summary of the text. It involves a summary and it involves summarizing, but it is not the summary. If I asked you a summary of your day, you know, the main idea might be something like I went to the park with my family, but a summary might say which park you went to, and we rode our bikes first, and then we got ice cream, and then we went swimming, a whole bunch of stuff. That's a summary, and the plot may continue other stuff, things too, whatever. So the main idea involves summarizing, and again, if you get back to make things simple but no simpler, you're summarizing it to the tiniest bit. But that's different than the topic when you're talking about the ELA concept of summarizing. Okay, so don't get mismatch the words. Again, the main idea is not the topic. It involves the topic, but in and of itself is not the topic. And the main idea, as we can see now, is not just what the topic is about. And we could argue, of course, my passage is about the SHSAT, but it's also about the SHSAT being hard. Okay? So you have to get that extra thing there. So it's not what it's also mostly about. Because my paragraph is easy. If you have a three-page passage, there's a lot going on back and forth there, and you have to wiggle back and forth to separate it out. And again, if we go back to the blue line here, get rid of the misinformation, get rid of what's unimportant. Okay? So then what people do is they interpret out of what I just said, oh, you mean the main idea is the most important point? Not quite. And this is where it gets, this is not only where the definition gets vague, but this is where it gets hard. It's not just about the most important. It has to be that you have to synthesize. You have to get that conceptual composite of all the ideas. It's not the most important point. In some passages, there is only one main point. In other passages, there could be a few. And sometimes the main points all connect into a super point, if you will. And that's the most important point. The different points together. I showed you before the different sections of a passage. Each section may have its own point and its own main idea. So as you're going through the passage and getting the point and main idea and topic of each paragraph, you're going to create a superset of them all. Right? That's what we're shooting for. Not just one. Even though in some passages there is only one. Okay, there could be a dozen. What you have to do is bring them all together and extrapolate out of it what's going on through the merging, the unison of them all, if you will, including throwing away ones that don't matter. Okay? Also, a big gotcha and a big misconception is, well, the passage says a lot about this thing, so therefore that must be the main idea. No, it could turn out that the passage gives a supporting example. So there's the main idea, it gives a supporting statement, and then it spends a lot of time talking about just one example. And it could look like the passage is about the example, because it might be 2 pages, and a whole page is dedicated just to one example. You say, well, the passage, 50% of the passage is about this example. So therefore, the passage must be about just that example. And therefore, that must be the main idea. But we don't do main idea by volume. We do main idea by what it means cognitively. Right? Again, it's conceptual, composite. conceptual, composite. So we're not going by the number of lines it talks about something. Now, don't get me wrong, that's a hint. And in some examples, that may turn out to be the main idea. We can do it by volume. Oh, keeps talking about the math section of the SHSAT. Therefore, there must be about the math section of the SHSAT. Meantime, the passage was about the SHSAT being hard. And it was only using math as the example, because it also may have somewhere talked about the ELA section, right? It just didn't spend a lot of time on it. Right? In the passage, there's only so much the author can spend on it. So they try to focus what's a good way to demonstrate and explain and prove and show and illustrate and give a reason for what I'm trying to bring forth. So they might dwell in a certain area. That's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. So if you will, sometimes what you have to mentally do is take your passage and mentally put stuff in a sidebar. Sidebars mean like they're off discussions. They're related to the topic, but they're kind of off there. So a lot of passages in the standardized test, they don't literally use sidebars. So you have to do that mentally. All right? So don't just go by volume. That's a big, big misconception. And what you need to do is look for all the other clues and positional things that I told you guys about. You're doing this by context. And you're not just finding the title and the first sentence and this and that. So at this point, I showed you about a dozen ways to find it. But you're reading the passage in full. You're reading it in full to understand it. Try to figure out what the meaning is. And then happen to look at the supporting information. And then the context and positional clues I showed you guys. If they all confirm it, then you're confirming it. But don't use the clues, the contextual and positional things as the way to do it. Read the passage and understand it. That's how you're going to get this here, right? And don't confuse the supporting details with the main idea itself as well. So that's another misconception that happens, right? And again, if you focus only on passages and only on the main idea, just focus on that. And it could be small passages. You don't have to read this grandiose tomes. Eventually, to make your way up to something, to the severity and intellectual level, whatever test you're taking, whether it's grade 3, grade 8, the English regions, the SHSAT, the SAT, whatever it turns out to be, the college high school test. There's a plethora of different ways to go there. The ISEE, the SSAT, the TACHS, the PSAT. This just goes on and on and on. Just start simple and work your way up. Because if you start at the end, it's too complicated. There's too many layers on top of this, and you want to keep building layers. It's almost where it's starting on a grade 3 state test, and then at grade 4, grade 5, grade 6, grade 7, grade 8. And the underlying hint here is I actually do that with some students, and we can move our way up from some of these things, and we can actually be further along by the time we get to where we need to be by doing 4 passages each year. That adds on another layer of complexity to it to get where we need to be. Because then you're crawling before you can walk. You're walking before you can run, right? Nobody just, we're not birds where we just fall off a tree and we're flying, okay? We're not able to do that. So we need to inch along, and then trot along, and then run along, and then run like heck, right? So this is a bunch of other misconceptions. Another thing some kids do is they just kind of give up and say the main idea is just any idea that the author expressed. Because the author expressed it, and again, they might see it being mentioned a lot, that has to be the main idea. It doesn't. It has to be tied into the topic. It has to be tied into something of significance. It ties into being important, and things are supporting that idea. And it doesn't mean just one paragraph supported it. It means it has to be laced through the whole passage normally, right? That seems to conflict with the volume statement I just made. But it's an overriding thing. It's not that it has to be mentioned a lot. It's just this, can you state it? And can you back it up? That's really what it's about, okay? So Also, a lot of kids say, well, if the main idea is what the passage is mostly about, and the main idea is about some important topic, then it's got to be something I find interesting. No, the passage is not about you. In fact, most kids find the passage is not interesting, but if you happen to find one interesting, that is not necessarily what the main idea is. Okay, so don't confuse interesting with important. Okay, and don't confuse, like I said before about bringing external things into this, you're not really supposed to be bringing your opinion into the passage. Sometimes in the writing section of some standardized tests, but in the multiple choice parts, normally, unless there's an explicit statement about your opinion, and that's rare, normally they want something verifiable that everybody's going to give the same answer on, because otherwise the test is invalid, right? That they're not looking for your opinion. So what you want to do is find the main idea and find things to support it across the whole passage, not just in one paragraph. Okay? And that you find something interesting or cool, that doesn't mean it's the main idea. Okay? Find what it is. So that's a misconception that just because something the author states, even if they spend a couple of paragraphs on it, that doesn't mean just because it's interesting to you that it's important. So what we're going to do is hone down on a mathematical algorithm again. So it's the topic, plus all the commonality of the supporting details, minus the misinformation, minus what's not important, minus the misconceptions, and minus what you think about it. Okay? Once you clear all that out, you finally got the main idea. All right? So there's a lot that kind of needs to be done to figure some of this out. All right, so let's return back to the SHSAT passage. So what I'm going to do, it's the same passage as before, but I'm going to add this line with a plus onto it. It's the exact same passage as before, but I'm going to add in the line, other tests such as the SAT are also hard. Okay? So does this change the main idea of my passage? Okay, is the plus line unimportant? Is it misinformation? Is it because you took the SHSAT and you think it's hard too, that therefore that's the main idea? Is it just a misconception that we're just totally off base here? Or is it part of the commonality of the supporting details? So this is where things start getting tough. Once we understand everything else I just talked about. So does this mean all standardized tests are hard? So is it a key detail? Is that a significant detail that I can use to support my thesis statement? Remember we said that the if, then, because stuff earlier? So because other tests such as the SAT are also hard, does that also mean the SAT is hard? No, that fails that test. Is it a sub-main idea? I mentioned before that in the beginning that main ideas can actually be sentences. So is it a sub-main idea? Yeah, it's a sub-main idea. So the question is it a sub-main idea enough that it matters? Or is it just poorly placed? Kind of like number 4 here. 4 is poorly placed. It doesn't belong there. It was a stupid sentence. It may belong in another, if I had a passage describing things about the SHSAT, it might have been. Even 9.2 here is weak. It still supports the fact that the SHSAT is hard, because did you ever take a test before with 114 questions? Did you ever take a test before that lasted 3 hours? Usually not. Your state test sometimes can last that long. It's actually shorter, but now you're allowed a limited time. Okay? But even at that, the state test is not 114 questions long. Maybe you had some hard homeworks or long homeworks. So you might just say, well, the SAT is long. This doesn't really mean it's hard. That's true, but it's still that's what I said. It's weak. There's still other things saying that it is hard. Okay. So if we go back to the plus line, Perhaps it belongs in a paragraph by itself. So does the plus line apply to the whole line or not? Is it merely interesting? Again, getting back to interesting versus important. Is it essential to the topic? Does it directly connect to the main idea? Okay, I say no. I say no. So my main idea still is here, but if you were writing this passage, I would say you screwed up writing this. This is a poorly written passage now with the plus line added to it. So now what we can do is take the same passage, the 1 through 9 plus the plus, okay? The same passage. And then we're going to add this 0 line and this plus plus line. So now, my first statement is, many standardized tests are hard. Okay? If I left off the plus and the plus plus lines, if I left off this line and that line, I would say statement number 0 is a screw up. It doesn't belong there because the rest of the passage supports that the SAT is hard and nothing else, right? If we only had line 0 and not the plus and plus line. All right? So if we work on the fact that the weak definitions of main idea, that it's what the passage is about and what it's mostly about, and the passage keeps talking about the SHSAT, and therefore it's about the SHSAT, it would still be wrong. It would still be wrong to now say that number 1 is our main idea any longer. It can't be. Because we're being told many standardized tests are hard. We're being told the SAT is hard. Also, it's also hard. Right? Some tests are hard. It gives a whole bunch of stuff about the SHSAT being hard. It then gives only one statement about the SAT being hard. And then at the end, it leaves us off saying, I wonder what other hard standardized tests there are. So our main idea has changed. Our main idea is now line number 0. Everything else stayed the same, the exact same lines. So that's why it's important to pull out what's important in here. Find the topic. The topic in paragraph D now is no longer the SSAT. The SSAT is just an example topic demonstrating one test that happens to be hard. The topic is now standardized tests. The topic of paragraph D is now standardized tests. It's no longer the SHSAT. Even though the SHSAT is mentioned 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times in 10 lines. It's no longer the topic of the sentence, of the paragraph, of this passage. So repetition is often used to find what the main idea is, but normally for the topic. But here we had an example, now that we had 0 and the plus plus lines, the repetition is misleading us. So again, that's another misconception, which is why you can't follow the dozen positional and contextual clues I gave you to detect what the main idea is. You can't follow that robotically, and you can't find it like a droid. You have to process this like a human with a cognitive thought process. It's, again, tying back, this is conceptual, all right? And you need to be able to figure that out from that level. So we can see just by introducing additional lines into the same existing lines, we can morph things into something completely different. This is a completely different beast than my original paragraph, example A, okay? So this is important because this is kind of what happens when we look at the whole passage, that we start pulling out stuff, and hopefully it's important. But do we pull out enough? And do we throw away enough that's not important to us or that we think is interesting? So this is the juggle. This is the balance. This is where main idea gets hard. on something like paragraph D, especially if we're only looking at paragraph D as if it was paragraph A. Paragraph D says something completely different than paragraph A. It says there's a whole bunch of hard standardized tests. And by the way, I'm going to use the SHSAT as one example to show you why it's hard. But you have to see the connection with the plus line. And by the way, the SAT is hard. And by the way, I'm wondering, are there any other hard standardized tests? And you could say that plus line is weak, because it's still not saying it, it's saying I wonder. But it's still talking about the hardness of standardized tests. That's what's being looked at here in the new paragraph and the revised paragraph. Okay? And by the way, when we go to the, especially on the SHSAT or the SAT, and when you look at the literature and the / writing section, you're like, wait, this is still multiple choice. It's still about writing. And even though in the revising editing section of something like the SHSAT, even though you're not being asked to write something, you're still being asked to process the paragraph. Now, some of the things are grammatical, like you may have a misplaced modifier or something. But some are asking you, what's out of sequence? What's out of sequence in this paragraph? Should the plus line be the first line of the paragraph? Should it actually be our lead-in sentence? Should the plus line go after the plus line, straight after it? Does line 9 belong in the paragraph at all? Should it go somewhere else? Okay? Or it may ask about 4. So all these are intertwined. So even though we often look at Manadera for the reading comprehension part, it's also tied into the other things, revising and editing. And in particular, I mentioned earlier on, when you write something from scratch yourself, you shouldn't just be sitting down and pounding out words, because you're normally going to end up with this long, meandering, wandering thing. What you want to do is write down some notes, organize an outline in bullet form or something, and then go for it. Okay? But what you're doing is when you organize in the bullet form or using some sort of graphic organizer, you're gonna create your thesis statement or what's your main idea, what's the main thing you want to talk about, not just topical, but the point you want to get across too. Okay? And it can be important, and it can be interesting. It could also be not interesting. It's just, what is the point you're trying to make, along with the topic you're trying to talk about? What are you trying to communicate en masse as a whole, right? But you want to get that down to a statement, at a statement level, without getting too carried away. And we could do this with anything. It's abstracting up. We keep abstracting up till we can make statements that make sense and encompass everything below that hierarchy of each level of abstraction we're going up and down on. Okay? So again, the misconception here is we could have looked at paragraph A and said, well, the SHSAT keeps getting repeated, and also the hardness of the SHSAT keeps getting repeated. So that must be what the passage is about, and that was true in both cases for paragraph A. But it's no longer true for paragraph D, even though the repetition leads us into somewhere. Okay? So you can't go strictly by the repetition. That's a misconception. And by the way, repetition helps us with poems. So be careful here on a poem. It probably has more meaning on a poem, because a poem has figurative levels and figurative language in it. You have to be careful. Even a nonfiction and a fiction passage, because there can be a theme and a moral. There can even be some passages, like when you read Aesop's Fables, if you ever did that, you could say, what's the moral of the story? It turns out somebody else thinks it's a completely different moral. And the truth of the matter is you're both right. And on passages like that, the main idea could vary, because we're being allowed to interpret. All right? So on the main idea questions on passages like these, we're not being told that we should be interpreting. And also, again, tying it to what I said earlier, in your classroom, you can beat to death a lot of passages. Really get esoteric. In fact, you could have a normal passage, and the teacher might say, tell me some alternate interpretation of this, that the author never meant, the author never intended, and just twist it. Take something that's sad and make it happy. Make something that's whatever and make it whatever. You're not being asked to do that in these kind of passages. All right? Well, that's bringing things to the limit, and that's doing table flips on it. You're being asked for the straight up information here. Okay? So be careful. So again, you're vying for the commonality, and you're vying for whatever. So you want to gather together all the paragraphs, and see what the running thread amongst them all is. What's the big idea? That's why this is called the central idea or the main idea. What's the big idea running through everything? Okay? It's about ideas, not just topics and not examples. Not topics and not examples, but ideas. Okay? And again, it's not about volume. The amount of text spent talking about something is in and of itself not the thing. It's about the conceptual idea. An idea is a concept. An idea is a concept. Right? A pencil is not, a pencil is an actual real concrete thing. A writing implement is a concept. How can I get something and move my hand so it can move? That's an idea. A pencil is actually one of those. It's an instance, it's an implementation of a concept that I need to write something down somehow on a piece of paper, which is also a concept. Because we have to make paper and we produce it. Okay? There's also conceptual stuff, the math. There's no such thing as a perfect circle. A circle is a concept. It's a mathematical concept only. It's an idea, right? That we talk about to use and do stuff with. So that's what you're looking for, is something conceptual. And just remember that passages provide extra information, and paragraphs have extra information, and whole paragraphs are extra information. So as I said before, there's lots of distractions, and especially on something like the SHSAT, this is part of what the revising and editing is about. Okay, so you need to grok the main idea of those passages too, at a different level. The revising and editing section of the SHSAT doesn't really ask you from the main idea from a cognitive perspective, but it's often asking you the main idea from an organizational perspective. Like what's off here? What's unimportant? What's the misinformation? That's what it's really trying to get us at with the main idea from that part. Where the reading comprehension is asking us, like, what did you read and what was the meaning from that? The revising and editing section of the SHSAT and the SAT is not about that part. So there's differences. Okay? So this is why, now there's some tests where you don't have to read the full passage. I suggest on the SHSAT that you do. People taking the SAT are more mature, they're older, they've read more, so there's other techniques for that. But on the SHSAT, I always suggest that a student read the full passage. Okay? So what you want to do is look for possible information as the passage flows as well. All right? So I often get asked a whole bunch of other kind of related questions, like so that's really the whole thing. That's the main idea we talked about the last time. We talked about some of the problems with processing the main idea and some of the gotchas conception, and not just gotchas, but the misconceptions people have about finding it. So there's kind of some physical bookkeeping that a lot of people like to do. Should I highlight stuff? Should I circle stuff? Should I underline stuff? Should I write stuff on the side? Should I use a graphic organizer? Okay? In a perfect world, yeah, do all that. But you're often taking a test like the SHSAT that's 3 hours long. There's a math section and an English section. The whole test is not about reading comprehension sections. So you don't have the time to do all this. You don't have the time to write on a scrap paper the whole summary of the story to make sure you got it. You don't have the time to highlight, circle, and underline every single thing. You don't have the time to go on the side and write what each paragraph was about, its main idea, its point of view, its theme, its whatever. You'd be writing a book by the time you do all that. So what you need to do is get used to reading these passages and figuring out how can I move more of this into my head, which is hard. I agree it's hard. So you have to move that. So what you want to do at the best case is you're probably on the SHSAT only I'm talking about here. There are other tests with different things. On the state test, because it asks for your written answers, you probably want to use a graphical organizer in some cases. Okay? And you probably want to annotate sometimes. So, but in all the tests, it's probably okay to use a highlighter, but don't highlight every single thing. I had a student who underlined, I had this more than once. I have students who underline every single line in the passage. I'm sorry, but every single line in the passage is not important. Okay? That's the same as not underlining anything then. Right? So what you only want to highlight or circle or underline is the super duper important stuff. Okay? What you want to do is, if you can, is read the questions before you read the passage. I've said this in a lot of live streams. Go read the questions before you read the passage. Now, having said that, some kids, this overloads their short-term memory. Because the passage overloads their short-term memory too. So you want to be careful with this. So if they say 10 questions or even 8 questions, you're not trying to memorize the questions. You're trying to do is get the main idea of each question. Get the main idea of each question. So some questions you don't have to memorize or even get the main idea. Because if the question is, what's the main idea of this passage? Well, that's a given and that's going to happen. So that one you don't even care about. Because what you're going to do is look at the questions, read the passage. As soon as you fit this passage, you're going to make a snapshot decision what the main idea was. And by the way, when you read the questions, you're grokking the main idea of the question. You are not looking at the answers. So you're going to read 8 sentences. You're going to read 8 questions. If it happens to be a passage with 8 questions. Get the general gist of what they're asking. And if you only remember 4 or 5 of them, you're 4 or 5 ahead. If this technique doesn't work for you, it's not a requirement. Okay? I'm not saying you must do this. But some kids have a problem with this and then they get used to doing it. So give it a shot. And it means when you go to the passage and you're reading it, you have 4 or 5 things you're going to be looking out for. Okay? So if a question was, why is the SHSAT hard? Right? You know, oh, as I'm reading the passage, let me look for why the SHSAT is hard. Now, you don't know yet whether it's connected into the main idea or not. Right? But if you have that in your back of mind, oh, the SHSAT might be hard, let me try to see, as I'm reading it, to find out where it might say that it's hard or not. Okay? And this also ties into a lot of kids asking me, I take too long on reading the passage. Or even, I have to read the passage twice. You kind of really don't have enough time to do that. And here's the thing. If you use some of these techniques to grok main idea, to grok the theme, to grok what's important, to grok what's not important, you're going to find out that you implicitly and innately start reading the passage with more understanding and reading it faster. You're not stuck on a certain paragraph anymore. You're not stuck saying like, oh, well, what? Right? Like, what happened here? Especially when a passage takes a turning point. Those can throw a lot of kids off when a passage takes a turning point. Because sometimes it's yada, 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 which is filler, unimportant stuff. And then it jumps into the meat thing. And while it's going yada, 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 unimportant, it looks like that's part of the main idea stuff. And then pow, it gets into the real stuff, and kids get like, whoa, what just happened? So as you get used to what I'm looking for here, not me, you, what you're looking for here, then you're going to find out that you're reading the passage faster. So and there are techniques to read a passage faster. There's speed reading courses you can take and all that kind of stuff. But you'll find that as you understand what main idea is, as you understand how some of the test-taking skills of how you can get a leg up. Right? If you don't look at the questions first, here's a good example. If you don't look at the questions first, you don't know what to look for. So this is 3 pages of, it's just this blob in front of you, right? That you don't even know what it is. So you need to be able to work through that and understand that. All right? So hopefully everybody had an interesting time learning stuff here. And please like, please subscribe. And I'll be doing more of these. I hadn't done some for a while. I'll do some Q&A ones. My email is coming up at the bottom. I'm Greg from GregsTutoringNYC at gmail.com. I might do some grade 9 math problems next, or some math problems. I'll have to see. Don't know what my schedule is. Sometimes I do it in the morning. Sometimes I do it in the afternoon, sometimes at night, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes a weekday, sometimes a weekend. Sometimes I'll do more than one a day. Sometimes I may not do one for every few days. Please like. I encourage you to do it. There's hundreds of streams here already, and there's always something that can be said. So peace out, people. Have a great day.